This episode we'll be learning how to do a chenille scarf. You'll be needing 0.35 meters for your base fabric, which is that inner middle fabric. I suggest you use a cotton, regular woven for quilting cotton. I did it with flannel, and you'll see at the end what happens with the flannel. You can also use a poly cotton if you want. Either would be fine. And then you'll need 1.5 meters of any kind of flannel to do the chenille part. Flannel works best. You can use cotton, but it tends to be quite thin. Rayon is nice, but again, you end up with a much lighter scarf. So depending on what kind of finish that you want to have in the end will depend on which fabric you use. Look forward to having you join us, and let's get right into it. Alright, we are ready to start cutting. So I have chosen this teal fabric for my base fabric, and I'll explain all that a little bit later. And I've chosen this funky print for my actual chenilling. Now the interesting thing about chenille is it doesn't really matter what print is on the fabric, because all you're seeing in the end is color. So you can take a really ugly print and turn it into a very lovely scarf just because of the colors that are in it. Now this one I'm doing, I've got my daughter in mind, because the teal was, or aqua, whatever you want to call this, was the color for her wedding along with brown. So we'll see how it turns out and if she's interested in it. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a 6-inch cut. We need 2 pieces of our base fabric. And I'll just there, change the angle a little bit. I'm left-handed, so if this looks a little odd, it's because of that probably. I've got my ruler down. I'm going to anchor it with my pinky, arch my fingers, and then do the cut. And then I will run my fingers up to replace them into the next position. I'm just going to go a second time because it just sounded like it didn't cut through all the way. There we go. And then we're going to do a second cut. So we just need those 2 pieces. I'm cutting them straight off the bolt, but if you had to go purchase some, 0.3 of a meter is all you would need. 0.35 if you have to do any straightening. There we go. So now we can put those aside, and we'll deal with those a little bit later. And I've already cut 1.5 meters of this fabric. And the first thing I'm going to do is actually take the salvages off, because we have to take the salvage off all along anyway. So if I do it first, then I don't have to try and remember later. I'm just going to fold this in half so I don't have to do quite as big a cut. Hopefully line everything up there. So there's our salvages gone. So now this has to be cut at a 45-degree angle. And to get your 45, you can go like this. Now the catch is you can't fold it in half and do a 45, because then you end up with it going an opposite direction. But you can fold it this way to do a 45. And basically your 45 is this here. So it's your bias edge is your 45. And I've just folded the point over. And then you can start from this edge, or you can start from this edge, whichever. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to use my scissors to cut this edge. And the beauty of chenille is It's extremely forgiving because you aren't going to see any of the imperfections in it. So if that is not accurate, it's not a big deal. Okay. So there we have it, our 45. So I'm just going to pull it back up, and then we're going to do 6-inch cuts along here. And it's okay to have these angles. We actually want the angles. That'll work for us in the future, as you will soon see. And then we're just going to strip this whole thing up into 6-inch strips. Alright, so we have that all stripped up. You saw that I was catching spots or not cutting, but my board is really beat up, so I think it was just on spots where it's cut through, and so then my blade doesn't actually go through. The last thing we're going to do, we're going to cut the salvages off of these as well. So just a quick salvage cut. Oh my goodness. This is really horrible. You can see there's a, I don't know if you can see there or not, but there's actually a cut here that I can stick my finger right under. So yeah, not a great spot to be doing cutting. Alright, now I'm going to take these and actually sew them together just at 3/8 inch seam, 1/4 inch seam, whatever you want to do, 1/2 inch, doesn't really matter. We just need 80 inches total of space here. So I'm going to go sew this, and then I'll be right back to show you how to layer it. As you can see, I've got it sewn. Color of thread does not matter. This is a perfect project to use up all your little scraps of bobbin, all your little bits of threads that you have been hoarding and don't know what to do with. This is the project for that. So we're just going to lay our scarf out, our base. I call for 80 inches, but if it's longer than that, that's fine. It just depends how long you want your scarf. I found 80 was a pretty good size, but this will end up being a little bit more than 80. I'm just going to go with it. We have our base fabric all laid out here, and now all we have to do is take our other fabrics that we've cut and layer them up. So we're just going to make a row, and I'm having this come over the edge, so when I cut it, I can cut it straight, and that's just fine, which I'll probably do before we get too far along. Now these guys, you're just going to butt them up against each other. You can overlap them slightly if you want. You don't want to stretch these, because if you stretch them, they'll actually get skinnier. So kind of make sure they're not stretched, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And you want 2 layers all the way along. And again, you're just going to butt those up, or you can overlap them slightly. Got lots of overhang on this one, but that's okay, that'll just get cut off. And then I'm going to start going back the other way. And you want 2 layers when you're all done on both sides. Perfection is not important. We're going to trim off the edges. We're going to get it all looking good before we throw it through the wash. So I'm just going to, because I have to flip this and it's going to be a little complicated, I'm just going to put a couple pins in on this side, right around center mark. This has got a little bit of weight on me, so I'm going to pull that over, scooch it the way I want it. Again, because we're chenilling it, a lot of imperfections that happen at this point are not going to show when it comes to the actual finished product. And you definitely won't see what color threads you're using because the chenille will come all up. I did mention what kind of fabrics to use. The best is flannel. And what I've discovered is the cheaper the flannel, the better it works. So don't use good quality quilter's flannel. I mean, you can, but it just doesn't fray quite as well as the cheaper flannel does. Less expensive, I should maybe say. Flannelette works really well because it's super fuzzy on both sides. So yeah, I'm just going to flip this just like that, and then we're going to do the same thing going back the other way. But you know what? Since I can see this really well at this point, I'm just going to trim that. And now we're going to put this one here. You're not trying to match designs or anything, you're just layering it on. Oh, that is so close. Maybe I'll just grab a different one. I'm just going to cut this piece off here at this end. There we go. I'm just going to throw some pins in on this side as well. Again, it's just to hold it because I have to shift stuff around a bit. Now we're going to trim these ends again. I'll just show you that out of 1.5 meters of fabric, there is very little left over. And what is left over, you could do another scarf and do one that's just got all of these little scrips and scraps in it, which would be kind of cool. If you do several scarves, you could have a whole variety of colors happening there. It might be kind of fun. So now we have to mark our center. So we have a 6-inch piece. So 3 inches is going to be our center. So we're going to just go from one edge, whichever edge you want, and we're just going to mark 3 inches, which is our center point. Now if this is not exactly center, again, do not worry. In the end, it will look fabulous. Just going to straighten this a little bit. There we go, we are ready to sew. So we've got our line going, and that's where we're going to sew first, is on that line. You just have to put your foot down. I like to backstitch at this one just because I want to make sure it's anchored well. Make sure you hang on to your threads at the beginning. I'll keep it from bunching up underneath. Now as it's going, you're going to watch for pins because we've got pins on both sides of this. And I like to just kind of coach it along on the back side, just keep pulling so that it keeps going through neatly. Because there's so many layers, the flannel wants to bunch up forward, so you're going to just kind of hold it a bit as it's going through to make sure that flannel is going through evenly on that top layer. Bottom layer is not going to be a problem because your feed dogs are pulling it through. The other thing you have to watch for is just where your overlaps were. And those are lying nice and flat. Especially the outside ones, because those will kind of catch up funny if you're not careful. You can see just under here I've just figured out where that is so I can keep a track of it. And I'm actually going to hold one hand underneath there, so when it comes up onto the machine, it's not going to flip backwards on me. You can see these edges aren't even, but don't worry about that. We'll take care of that at the end before we wash it. And I'm just back stitching at the end as well. Cut your threads, and there we are. Our first row is done. You're going to go through and pull out all your pins if you didn't pull them out as you were stitching. There's one there. One more. Alright, so now we're going to sew at 3/8 of an inch. So 3/8 is just on the outside edge of your presser foot. You could eyeball it. The other option is if you can move your needle to the left, that might be a nice way of doing it. See if I can do this. So each machine is a little different. You just have to figure out if your machine will do it or not. And then to just check to see if it's going to be the right distance, I just put a ruler under my foot and put the foot down right beside. And 3/8 is a little bit further over. Oh, maybe just right there. So if you just rotate your needle and it comes down, it should come down just at the 3/8. If your needle can't be set exactly right, then you might have to move it completely over to the left and then go by, maybe the inside of your toe. you'll have to use some other form of measuring it. If you have a quilting foot on, then you kind of have to keep it in the center, so that's a bit of a problem. But. So we're going to stitch the next row. I'm just going to move the pin so that it's keeping control over this little loose piece there. I think that's the only one on the back side. Yeah, the rest are on the front, so that's not going to be a problem. So we've reset our needle, and I'm just going to use my presser foot as the guide, the extra outside edge. And I'm going to hold my tails, start stitching, back stitch, and then just sew to the end. When we do this one, we're going to keep going across, and then we're going to do the other side. So we ran out of thread. I'm just going to start a few stitches back. Again, it doesn't matter what color. This is now purple. Before you had red on, but in the end you'll see that you don't even see the stitching. So this time I'm actually just going to turn this around and go down this other side, just to speed things up. Oops. Already going backwards. You definitely want to back stitch at the beginning and end of these because these are going to be your tassels and you don't want them coming undone. So this is what you don't want to have happen. You don't want it to fold up on you when you're working. So I'm going to have to rip that piece out and flip it and then restitch that little section as well as the section I'm working on right now. So I went out to the store and grabbed some more bobbins because I've already used up a couple. Make sure that you cut your threads when you put your new stuff on so that you don't have to go back. I just have to restitch that, so I'm going to do that right away. So I'm starting from scratch anyway. Again, you just start it in the back a little bit, stitch over your existing stitching, and then go a little bit further. You don't have to back stitch on these guys. as you're doing that last row, you just want to try the best you can to not fall off the edge and to catch all of the fabrics. And if you have to lift your foot every so often to pull that top fabric in, because it wants to slip in under the needle, so you might have to lift your foot every so often to get it in behind where it's supposed to go. Like now, right, like that. Sewing is done. We're just going to cut all the threads, which there's lots of because I was using up old bobbins. Ended up using that many bobbins. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. 10 bobbins cleaned off on this project. Not bad. So I'm just going to tidy up all the ends here, and then we will go on to the next step. Now we have all the stitching done. We're going to start the cutting. So the first thing we want to do is we just want to trim off these edges. We're just going to trim them so they're about 1/4 of an inch from that sewn edge. And if you don't have all the layers, it's not a big deal. If we decide after we've washed it that it's a problem, you can just trim halfway through this next one instead. Now, part of the reason we do it on the diagonal like we did, the 45 degrees, is so that it doesn't fray out on you. It does fray out, but you don't get the... It will go stringy if you don't do it on the diagonal. This way you've got little tiny ends happening instead of big long strings happening. I saw somebody had tried to do a chenille rug, and they had done it on the straight grain, and it was just a mess. There we go. It's all trimmed. So we're ready to cut our chenille. There's a couple different chenille cutters out there. This is a clover chenille cutter, which is by far my favorite. Olfa has one out as well. Clover's is actually, they call it a slash cutter. Olfa has one as well. It's more of a little round thing, not quite as easy to hold, but it does have different lengths of these and a different width depending on what width you make your chenille. I just find this makes the nicest chenille, the 3/8 inch, and this just fits through quite nicely. So this one comes with a short one as well, so if you're kind of doing curves, this is what it's meant for, or the very long finger. Now, back in the day when chenille first came out in the 90s, I think was maybe the first round, they had basically they were little tiny green cutting boards that would go in there, and then you'd have to use your rotary cutter and ruler and cut through. And the whole idea is that you want to cut the 2 layers but not the third. So you want to leave your base fabric, and you're going to cut the 2 layers on top of the base fabric. I'm going to start further into the middle first. I think if I remember correctly, it always worked better you could snip it with some scissors just to get it started. And then you just push it through. And you're just going to have to watch when you get to seams and stuff. Sometimes that'll be a problem, but so just like that, we have the first one done. And I like to have the bulk of my fabric on the hand that I'm holding it down with, so I'm going to do these outside edge ones coming back this other direction. So we're just going to do all of this and the other side, and then we're ready to wash it. Well, not quite. We have another project first. So again, I'm just going to snip the beginning. And you can use scissors to do the whole project if you don't have one of the fancy cutters. Just a little bit harder. But you can see that you could go ahead and do the whole thing with scissors. Yes, if your blade is fairly thick like this one, it's going to take a lot of snipping to get through there. But it is doable. So I did find it best to actually cut up for 4 or 5 inches and then start. Then you're not fighting with everything right at the very end, the very beginning. That's just a small amount. Oops, missed one. Where did I miss it? Right there. And it will warp your scarf a bit, but don't worry about it, because once it's washed and it shrinks up, it will be just fine. So once you get the first side done, then you do the second side. Again, you're going to start, and I find it's useful to go about 4 inches in your beginning, and then it makes it really easy to slide that cutter through. Again, make sure you don't cut your base fabric, otherwise you will just have little skinny strips of chenille. So I just want to say, if it's dragging, which it's not now, but there's little things to turn around here. This will give you a new cutting surface on this blade, because the blade doesn't actually turn around in that space. It actually stays stationary. So just give it a little click around and it will give you a new cutting space, and it will go much better. Now the other thing to watch is where that seam was. If there's any problems, just kind of lift up and hopefully that toe will go right over, and then it will go right over that seam and it won't be a problem. So where our joins were, you may have to just stop and give a little snip to get through there, and then get going again. So we're finished cutting all the slashes. The one thing to try to do when you're cutting the slashes is to try to stay in the middle. So I don't know if you can see this. Just now, let me find one where I went off. Usually it's the outside edges that are the problem. So just here you can see that it's wider on one side than the other, and that will show up a bit in our chenilling, but here I went, of course, the other way to overcompensate. So anyway, it is what it is. We're just going to kind of stretch it so it's flat like that. We're going to go 6 inches and we're going to mark it on both ends. And then we're going to go stitch it. And I like to actually double stitch it, like go back and forth over the whole thing several times. This is our fringe. So marked, I'm going to go stitch back and forth on there, making sure that all of these lay flat as I'm doing that on both sides and on both ends. And then I'll be right back. Here we are to the last step before washing. So we've stitched across 3 times on both ends, and now we are simply going to cut that middle piece. So the green that we didn't cut before, we're going to cut that base fabric just up to that stitch line. So this becomes our fringes. If you think 6 inches is too long a fringe, then you can do less, or you can do more if you want more fringe, whatever. If you're wanting a wider scarf, you could do it at 6.5 or 8 or 8.5, whatever. Again, the choice is yours. You will take more fabric though, so do be aware of that. It took 1.5 meters to do this size scarf, so if you are making it wider, you will need a little bit more. And this is a perfect project for today because we got 6 inches of snow today. Miserable. It is nice and fluffy snow though, so. But chances are this snow might just be here for the rest of the year. Alright, our fringe is all done. Let's go wash it. So here we have it, the finished scarf. I actually only had to put it through the wash once to get it to look so fluffy. The one thing that did happen though is that it fell off the edge on the one side and a little bit on the other, so I'm actually going to have to trim that off. The one thing I would definitely do for future is I would do cotton instead of, I used a flannel for the base fabric, and it's just a little too loose a weave, so it has problems holding together, as you can see here. So I would definitely use a cotton instead, and I will tell you that at the beginning of this. The other thing then is all of this has to get trimmed. So this is what it looks like once it's trimmed, nice and neat. But this is what it looks like when it comes out of the washer and dryer. And this is how much lint came off of just this scarf. So do make sure you check your lint catcher in both your washing machine and dryer if you have one in your washing machine. And there you go. Here you have it, the finished product after it's been all nicely trimmed. We took off the extra excess on the sides. And it's looking fabulous, and I think that's just the right width. But it's your choice. So again, I'm just going to show you, this is what it looks like now, and this is what it looked like before. So you can see it's just about colors, it's not about designs at all. I'm hoping that you liked what you saw. If you could hit the subscribe button, that would be excellent, or at least hit the thumbs up for me. Leave a comment if you have any questions or any problems. There will be a free pattern for this down below in the comment section. Feel free to copy it if you want. Just credit it to me, please, Heather Truscott. That's all I'm asking. All right, have fun.